Hello, this is Coach Mike. Gonna start out with our focus group watch list video. You should have already received your focus group spreadsheet, so this video will help you kind of make some understanding of the spreadsheet. Gonna start out here just going in alphabetical order. Apple. Apple got just above our target. The highest close was just above there. Had a bit of a dip, but even if you look at that dip, it kind of into a consolidation point. As far as I'm concerned, Apple's a little bit difficult to read here. If you're in a long, I would probably still be happy with that long and sticking with it. I would use any close below 94.25 as the stop. You will see I put a couple potential trades on the focus group watch list, a potential calls trade, a potential puts trade, based on strength to break a point or to fail a point. And it's real simple here. We're going to see market reaction this week based on earnings, I believe, even for stocks that don't have earnings this week. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit of a decline, even if it's just to this trend line area or so. I don't know that I'd want to go short in Apple with puts as strong as it's been. But if I was in a calls position already, I'd probably heavily consider a puts position. Otherwise, might have to be kind of on the fence for a swing right now. Going to move over to Caterpillar. Caterpillar had that rough day where a lot of stocks gapped down. So it gapped down. It still came back to hold that 109.38 by the end of the day. So if you really look at that, it's the closing price that matters. And where it's at right now, it's still giving you that potential for those 816, 110 calls, even though they're just about right at the money right now. They'd be a little expensive, but I still like those so long as you continue to close above 109.38. Over to CVX. Yeah, I do have, based on the high of this swing, the low of this swing, and our last high, 127.95 was a Fibonacci pullback point for CVX. Now, I see that, and I wouldn't be surprised for it to go up tomorrow. But I think I'm going to wait just a little bit, and let me tell you why. I won't wait more than a couple days to see how it forms up before I would go long. But I feel I can wait those couple days because on both of those last uptrends, it went up several days. So I'd have a little time to kind of get a little secure in a position or feel more secure about it. Plus also, the same justification, a trend line started off the last low. We're still a little ways off that. And then of course our swing point. And CVX, if you go back and research it a little bit, it's actually been a good swing point trade. And it's very good off the chart patterns as well. We've talked about that, but those chart patterns that coincide well with swing points seem to be better trades than just the chart patterns alone, though evening stars or morning stars. So with CVX, I'm probably going to let this, trade a day or two this week to see how it does before I would make an entry. But at this point, to be quite honest, it'd be a calls entry that I'm looking for. Up next, let's go over to Facebook. Facebook, I'm just going to say, had a much stronger day than I would have ever anticipated on Friday. Wednesday and Thursday were kind of like inside days. They pretty much did the same thing if you look at where they opened and closed. Friday had that gap up. It filled the gap for just a second and charged on. There's a couple ways to look at this. If you look at the consolidation or pullback, because, from the highs it did make a decent pullback to this low, well, that would mean you made a lower low. But if you look at the move overall that began here off the 61.79, even though only slightly higher, still a higher low. So I am really watching right now because I do have a long position for August $70 calls. I'm actually kind of watching to see if it makes a lower high or not. If it makes a lower high, and with a couple weeks still till earnings, I'm going to keep my calls, but I may start building a position in September $60 puts. Maybe take one or two of those as a swing just in case, hey, if we make a lower high here, and we might start downtrending and have to build that way. But as of right now, we haven't made a lower high, so I'm still confident in my $70 calls. So that's kind of what I'm looking at overall. Now you'll see on the spreadsheet a target, this 51.66. Well, the reason I have to look at that as a longer term thing too is we haven't made a lower high, and we actually fell below the fib target from this high, low, high, from this past high, and then this low, and then the higher high. So I actually had to go from the weekly and go from the high that was made here to the low and again to the high to get the determination of that price. So I don't think it would drop straight to there. I think it would kind of, if it's going to do that, it'd be more like we saw with Facebook before, where it made lower highs, lower lows until it got to a target. And so we'd want a couple, 3 months, at least 2 months to get us down to that if it were to do it. So really what I'm watching on for Facebook for swings is whether or not it makes a higher high or not, or a lower high, because I've already got my long that I've built up pretty nicely, and we're doing pretty good on with the $70 calls for August. But because of that, I'm not really too anxious to rush into something else just yet until I get a better read on the chart. Going to move now to First Solar, FSLR. First Solar, a bit bigger drop than I thought. Now, it did make a decent bounce. It kind of closed red on Friday. I want to go to the weekly chart, which isn't the chart that's linked on the spreadsheet I sent. But I want you to look back here when this channel started really playing out for First Solar. And you see as we started falling back hard, we actually had a bit of an uprise. It kind of trickled. It had one big down week, and then it really went slowly into the bottom trend line. Now let's fast forward, a year and a half later, and we get up into the upper trend line. We fall pretty hard. We make a few weeks, decent bounce. We kind of trickle down, then we have the big hard week. I know 6-8 weeks ago it was hard to believe that I would ever be still looking for that bottom trend line, but that is still what I'm looking for. It's just that after how big the down week was last week, it might be a slow to get there, more rounded process. And for that, I really don't have an interest in touching First Solar, because I just personally, for me, somebody that's not going to sit and watch a First Solar trade, don't see it as being a really lucrative opportunity. GLD, if you watch the longer of the two market overview videos I made, I actually do some speaking on GLD in reference to the indices overall. And, GLD, let's face it, if you had traded that horizontal channel and the strangles, your calls are doing so good right now you wouldn't care about your puts. And you made money on the puts down here doing the same trade plan. Now, do I think it can get up to the 130, 131 mark? Absolutely. But from this point, I wouldn't trade it for that, because the risk to reward is way out of your favor. Until we break out of that wedge that I spoke about in my market overview video, I don't think we should plan for anything except for the strangle entries within that horizontal channel. Once the chart shows us something different, we will trade something different. Up next, Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs has earnings Tuesday morning, and to be quite honest, I don't want to put something on the spreadsheet that may get completely blown away depending on the earnings. Now, one thing I will say, Citigroup has earnings tomorrow, and if Citigroup's earnings are good, like really rock it out of the park good, you might, if you're willing to make a risky trade, take an earnings trade on Goldman Sachs. But I'm not going to put anything out until I actually read the earnings report for Goldman Sachs, because I think this quarter is very, very important for the markets in general, and I think it's more important for the financial sector. So with Goldman Sachs, trade at your own risk before the earnings. You might find some volatility on Monday just based on positioning for the earnings if you want to take advantage of a day trade, but you won't see any alerts from me on Goldman Sachs until after the earnings, because earnings plays are extremely risky. They can be extremely profitable, but you have to understand earnings trades are like lottery trades. You have to go into it understanding you could lose 100%. or you can make a whole lot of money. So, or if you try to get a little cocky and strangle it, it could just open flat and you lose a whole lot of money on 2 trades. So for the focus group, the earnings trades really aren't the direction of where I want to go with those. So the earnings is Tuesday morning. Let's get the earnings report. We might see some volatility on Tuesday, but no new trade going into tomorrow. Lockheed Martin, it had this little M pattern, which it's almost come back up and retested again, but it's also started to form this little bit of a downtrend. It bounced up pretty good Thursday and Friday, more so than I would have expected, but I wasn't really watching for swing entries on Friday, nor do I really ever. I'd be more interested in watching it according to this down channel line. If it were to break this, I wouldn't trade it just on the breakout no matter what it did. I'd probably let it come back down, because more times than not they do that, and see where this one positions more. It's going to have earnings next week, not this coming week, but the following week. So it could be a little harebrained until then, but I can tell you one thing. I can look at a weekly chart of Lockheed Martin, and I see a specific trend, and I see a definite change in that trend, and that has been concerning for me. So it's not that big a deal. I know some people don't understand this, but it's not a big deal to just sit on the sidelines sometimes with these, because quite frankly, it's better than losing money. And when you have doubts about trades, the last thing you want to do is rush into trades with doubts, because if you're doubting it during the trade planning, there's a higher probability chance that it's a pretty doubtful trade to begin with. So for me personally, not looking for anything fresh on Lockheed Martin. I'm going to monitor. If it were to break that downtrend and then come back and retest it, and give me like a higher low, that's where I would want to start maybe looking at long positions. Let's go over now to UPS and see what Brown can do for you. UPS had that ascending triangle breakout. It actually just went into the prior resistance, pulled back. You notice the trend line that I've got on it, that it's been trading fairly well in. It fell below that Thursday, and Friday went up and closed right at it. Now, if you see a pullback from that line, could it be a good short trade? Absolutely. Where do I think it could go? Really, I think you got to plan for, into these low closes, about $100.46. And because of that, even though I believe that it would be a good trade setup, if it were to do that, I'm not saying it will do that, but if it were to give you continual closes below 102.79, so any close above that would be your stop on a puts play. And if it were to start pulling back from this trend line and give you like an evening star pattern, I think it's very likely it gets down there. I just think it's a risk-reward ratio that I wouldn't personally be interested in, and that's why I didn't include that on the spreadsheet, even though I do recognize it as a potential trade to make. Finally, going to go over to Visa. Visa's going to be a little late in the week on earnings, and so actually it's not even this week, it's the following week. But with the financial stocks reporting, so many financial stocks reporting this upcoming week, I'm not necessarily looking to get frisky unless other financial stocks have good earnings. Because I think if Citigroup has good earnings tomorrow and Goldman Sachs has good earnings on Tuesday, even though people would say, well, Visa's not really a bank, it's still a financial stock, sector-based momentum will assist it some, and I think that people will look more at, well, if the financial stocks are doing good, that means the economy's doing good, which means people are spending money, and people love to spend money on plastic. And therefore, we could get that move play that I had the same play on last week's spreadsheet, but would be looking at like August 225 calls. I know I have this fib target 224.33. I also got this horizontal, the swing point, it's up around 226.40. I kind of split the difference with it because of the price of those options. And if we get good earnings from Citigroup and Goldman Sachs, I think you would have justification for a swing on those 826, 225 calls. But I would wait for those two earnings before I did anything. So there's a look at the focus group charts for what I see coming off last week's closes. And, this week's going to be an interesting week. Financial sector with some earnings, and I think we got to be watching those pretty darn closely this week.